Okay, we're going to do one more video before I call it a day. I'm going to do the same thing, guys. I'm actually going to group two assignments together because I want to compare the authors of these two assignments. And remember, we're still kind of building that base, looking at some traditional philosophy, looking at some new thoughts, some new ideas, maybe some things you haven't read before, just kind of expanding our base of knowledge here, looking at how other people have approached this idea of right and wrong or good and bad. Let's see, the two articles I'm going to group together in this video are Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, Immanuel Kant, and Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill. Now again, guys, you have small excerpts out of larger writings. Again, these two authors, volumes and volumes of writing, so just a very small portion. And again, I'm going to do the same thing with these two that I do with the last two. I'm just going to approach it from a very narrow perspective. So you may read it and see completely different things, and you're free to talk about those in your homework, or when you blog, you can talk about whatever you want to. You don't always have to talk about what I talk about, okay? Just giving you a little kind of help getting started in case you need some help about what to talk about. Okay. These two authors. We kind of started with the last two authors. We looked at, the very base of what kind of shaped their theories. These two authors, we're going to look at kind of a different phase in their theories. Both of these two authors have what I sort of call one-liners for, they both believe that we are reasoning human beings, and that in order to make good decisions, in order to make, they like to use the terms just decisions, in order to make just decisions, that you need to think about what you're doing. You don't just act, you think. So in other words, kind of what we're doing here, they want you to think about right and wrong, kind of have an idea of what you think is right and wrong. Just don't kind of haphazardly trip through life, but actually think about what you're doing. Now, these two guys have, as I was saying, sort of one-liners on how they think, what the thinking process should be to come to the right decisions. Immanuel Kant, he has what he calls a categorical imperative. He says when we're trying to make decisions about what is right and wrong, how we should behave, that we should go through this process. We should think, in this situation, what would I want every other person to do if they were in this situation? And that is then how I should act. This categorical imperative I said something about a second ago, those are basically what you might call universal laws. He believes that we as human beings, that there are certain things that are just so basically right, that we all agree that they are right, and we all agree upon those basic things. And he says really all decisions are made upon those basic ideas. And so therefore, if we think, what would I want everyone else to do, and then that is how I should behave, we would all really come to the same conclusions because we all really have the same base of what is right and wrong. These universal laws that we all revert back to, it's wrong to kill someone. It's wrong to steal. And he doesn't spell out these laws, guys, but I'm just giving you some general examples. He says there are these universal laws that we all just, they're so basic, we all know that these are the right things to do. And so if we fashion our reasoning in that manner, when we're faced with decisions, we say to ourselves, what would I want everyone else to do? And then that's how we act, that we all basically will act in the same manner, and we will act in a manner that is acceptable and that is the right way to act. Now, see, I think I'll go through the other theory and then come back and kind of mesh them together and talk about them. Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill. Again, he's one of these thinking philosophers, guys. He says, we have the ability to reason. We have this critical thinking ability, which is what this whole course is about, trying to build your critical, or at least use your critical thinking skills. Hopefully you already have them. We're just going to exercise them a little in this course. He says, since we as human beings have that ability, then again, we need to reason. We need to think about what we're doing. So his pathway to thinking about things so that we act in the right manner, we make the right decisions, is he says that when we are faced with decisions, that we should make the decision that creates the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, implicit in that theory is that there obviously, he doesn't really see a universal. There is no one thing that you could do that everyone would agree is the right thing. Immanuel Kant says that there are these basic universal laws that just everybody agrees on. John Stuart Mill doesn't see that. He says, there's no one thing, no one action that everyone's going to agree on. But there is an action that the majority of us will agree on, the greatest good for the greatest number. And that's what you should do. Now, as I was saying, implicit in that is the fact that there is I guess you might say, least number. If there's a greatest number, there's a least number. There's a group that really isn't going to be benefited by every decision. He says, however, that we all know what the greatest good for the greatest number is, and he believes that if we reason, what is the greatest good for the greatest number, even if I'm in the least number, I will do the action that creates the greatest good because I realize that overall, that's the best action. Even though it may not be the best action for me, it's the best action for us as a society, and so I will tend to do the right thing even if I'm in that least number. So kind of two different paths of reasoning here. So we didn't really, the last guys we talked about their very base of their philosophies. We didn't really talk about their philosophies in this manner. These guys, I kind of skipped the base and kind of went to the middle of the phase of philosophy. And we're looking at sort of how they say they both think you should reason through decisions. And these are kind of like their one-liners on how you should reason through that. Now, what I want you to think about is, do you think you should always think? Some reasoning philosophers, because like I said, these two guys fall in that category of reasoning philosophers. Some reasoning philosophers, and I guess really the first two guys would be more of kind of the nature philosophers. They don't necessarily, obviously they think that we can think and all, but they think you're born with this innate nature that controls. These guys say, hey, we can do whatever we want to do. We just got to think about it. So among these reasoning philosophers, some of the reasoning philosophers say if you don't think about a decision, if you just act on instinct, then it can never be a right decision. I mean, there might be a good outcome, but that doesn't make you a just person. The only way you can be a just person, a good person, is to think about what you're doing and have, a good motive. And I guess that might be the way you want to look at these two theories. It's kind of their motive. Utilitarianism, the motive is to create the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Immanuel Kant, his motivation is to do the thing that we would all want to have done. And like I said, he believes there are those kind of universal just rights that we will all agree on. These two guys, what do you think about it? Do you think that these are workable theories? Immanuel Kant, every time I'm faced with a decision, I should think, what would I want everyone else to do? Some people would say, well, yeah, there are just universal rights that we all agree on. You shouldn't kill someone. We can all agree on that, right? Of course, we all can think of exceptions to that, but the basic idea of that, we can all agree on that. But is that true? If I'm faced with a decision and I think, what would I want everyone else to do in this situation? Is that too many variables? Do I really know what everyone else would want? Maybe there's someone out there who does think it's okay to kill people. Hitler? Obviously, he thought it was perfectly fine to accomplish his end goals to kill millions of people. So obviously, if Hitler and I were faced with the same decision and we thought, what would I want everyone else to do? He would have a very different thought than I would. At least I hope he would have a very different thought than I would. So is it true that there are some things that are just so universal that we will all come to the same conclusions? Or are there so many variables in our environments that just never can work? That's what I want you to think about. With utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number of people, well, I mean, the most basic question there, if I am in the least number, will I really do what's for the greatest good? And I'm not saying that these philosophers say if you follow their reasoning path that you will always do the right thing, but they say if you follow the reasoning path, you are most likely to do the right thing. I think both of them allow for the fact that sometimes we know the right thing, but we don't do the right thing. But at least we know the right thing. With utilitarianism, will we all agree on what will create the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Or do we have different ideas of what good is? Do we have different ideas of sort of the end game, the benefit, the outcome that we want? And if we all have a different idea of what the greatest good is, then how is that a workable theory? Or do you think it is a workable theory? We basically all know what is the greatest good, so we will do the greatest good. Again, I don't have any answers here. Nobody really has any answers. These are just thoughts, these last four philosophers that we've talked about, the way that they think that people should think, or why people behave the way they do. And again, I'm not trying to get you to memorize theories, guys. I'm not trying to get you to say, oh, I'm a utilitarianism guy. Just trying to kind of introduce some new thoughts to you and get you to think about it. What do you think? What do you think about these two theories? Do you think they're kind of good one-liners, good ways to kind of start your reasoning path to think about what's right and wrong? Or maybe, when you're blogging or when you're writing your papers, maybe you want to come up with your own theory on how you think that you should pattern your thoughts. Maybe you agree with these two guys that were reasoners, were thinkers, and the thing that you have to do to make right, good, just, whatever you want to call it, good decisions is to think about it. But maybe you have a completely different path, completely different motivation to use to think about it. So that's what I want you to think about with these two.